I'm Susan Barnes. I'm a retired communication professor. I am a certificate holder from the Spiritualist National Union. And I've been doing mediumship since about 2006. And when we came up with this idea for doing a conference in Lilydale on physical mediums, what I didn't know was that 75 years ago, the Lilydale Assembly Board banned physical mediumship from Lilydale. So this is the first time in 75 years that we are bringing it back. So I'm very pleased to be able to do that and to share it with more of the world, the global experience. So we are doing one day of the conference online, which people can sign up for. It's a day with Michael Shane. The morning session will be about precipitated art, and then Michael will do a session on apports, and in the evening he's going to do a billet demonstration. And we figured out how we can get our online audience involved with the billet questions. So with that said, just go to my website, www.spiritartgallery.net, and you can find out the information. So that's done with the advertising. Let's get to the physical mediums in Lilydale. I think when I started doing this, it was amazing the number of mediums that I found. And one way, ironically, that I had to find them was through photographs in the museum of the mediums sitting on the porches with their signs. So that the signs would say, materialization medium or different types of physical mediums. Lilydale itself was founded on physical mediumship. In the early days, there was all kinds of stuff going on here, and they even did it in the auditorium space, which is the main space in the Dale. So people did it on the, quote, platform, and we know some people, like the Bank Sisters, we know did it, but other mediums did it as well. There were all kinds of mediumship here, and maybe I'll go to the slides so we can start, so I can help remember all of them, because there's so many different types. It's really rather amazing. Okay. So this presentation is on the physical mediums from Lilydale's history, and I focused on the mediums from the 1800s up into the beginning of the 20th century. As I said, the mediumship stopped here 75 years ago. Physical mediumship stopped. And since then, most of these mediums have been forgotten. In fact, I'm horrified that the Dale hasn't even remembered significant people like Cora Richmond, who played such an important role in the beginning of the Dale's development. And she was a marvelous trance medium and someone that I'm interested in. And so with that said, I'm going to start going through the different mediums. What I did was I found the mediums' names, because this one doesn't have a sign on it, but all these porches, this is what the pictures would look like. They would be sitting on the porches, and up on the side of the house, they would have a sign that would say what kind of mediums they were and what they did. The first medium I'm going to talk about is E.V. Wilson. Now, he was working maybe a little bit before Lilydale was called Lilydale. And sometimes, earlier times, it was called Camp Cassadaga. And so when you're looking it up historically, you'll see that it's hard to sometimes place whether people were here or not. He had to have been here, though, because all of these mediums traveled all around the country. They did it by train, so they would go from train to city to city to city, doing different spiritualist lectures and demonstrations of their mediumship. Now, Wilson was born in 1818 in Pittstown, Rensselaer County in New York, and his mother was also clairvoyant. Just as a note, we know that there were a lot of people that were clairvoyant before the Fox sisters. However, what's significant about the Fox sisters is that they were the first ones who actually demonstrated that you could communicate with the spirit world. So that's why that's so significant. And I will just say, here's what they said, his sister said about him. Our mother, being highly mediumistic and often in communication with spirits, was always in sympathy with him because he was ill as a child, but his father wasn't. He received an excellent education, and he treated everyone of a kind as a superstition. That's what his father did. His father did not really want to believe in spiritualism or believe in the subject, so his mother had to help him. He was sickly and then finally was able to come into his own. He claimed that he spoke true spiritualism. When I say true spiritualism, he stayed with the principles. If you look at the history of the United States at that time, and what this research has revealed is it's revealed a lot of what the culture was like at that time, and including the political things that were going on. Spiritualists were very involved with the slave movement, with the women's rights movements, and they were also involved with the free love movement. And so Wilson was accused of being involved with the free love movement, and he actually sued a newspaper and vehemently stated that he did not believe in that. He did write a book. His book has a lot of examples of his mediumship. At the time, they called them test mediums. Test mediumship was a little bit like what we call evidential mediumship today, but one of the big differences is that when they would do the test medium, they would stand up and say something about the person. For example, they would say, at 10 years old, you almost drowned in the river. At 18 years old, you left home and you started to pursue your own career. And they would state all these things, and the people would have to say yes, no. And then the question would become, where did you get the information? And then he would go and say, oh, it's coming from your grandma, Martha, or your Aunt Tilly, whoever it was. So they would give evidence to the person about their life first, and then they would tell them who the spirit was that was giving them the information. He died in 1880, and his portrait was painted by Mr. Boozer, and it's in the Assembly Hall in Lilydale, New York. So that's why I mentioned Wilson. Cora Richmond. I have fallen in love with Cora Richmond. She is phenomenal. She has a number of books out there, and I hopefully will do more research on her. And this is one of her quotes. When one can enter such an atmosphere of transient light, communicating with such a group, it is because one has need of and is in harmony with the spirits of the group. This was taken from her book, While Out of My Experiences While Out of My Body. It's a short little book that's available today. And she was known as Cora Laudancia Veronica. Scott was her name when she was born, although she's also known as Cora Lynn Victoria. She was born in Cuba, New York, which is not too far from Lilydale. She was born with a caul over her face. She was one of the best known mediums of the spiritualist movement of the last half of the 19th century. We believe that one reason why she's not known as well as she should be is because she was overshadowed by the Fox sisters, because she was a contemporary of the Fox sisters. But she was a famous inspirational speaker and a healer. She was known under various names, which is sometimes why it's difficult to track her down. She was married 4 times, and she always took her husband's name. So she started out as Cora Scott. She then used the name Cora Hatch. So there's a lot of work about her because that was when she was in her heyday. She was Cora Hatch. She was then Cora Tappan, and finally Cora Richmond. So when you're looking her up, you have to realize that you have to check all of those different names. Here's another quote from her. If there is a system of forces primarily working in the universe, which science has failed to discover, and if behind the primordial germ there is a spiritual power, and that power acts through a series of laws that culminate in the human organism, then science has thus far been deprived of the spirit of possessions, and the human mind has only the shell of life by which to judge of what life really must be. And that was through the spirit of Dr. Benjamin Rush. She argued in her book, wrote a book on spiritual healing, and it's true today, that science didn't understand the spirit forces that were going on, and that if you're going to really heal someone, you had to look at the spiritual side as well as the physical side. So she's done a lot of really marvelous work on spiritualism. I was recently at the Arthur Findlay College, and we were all talking about Cora, and she's up on the wall in several places. Let me see if I can point her out here. This is her picture here, is Cora on the big wall in the college. But there is a reprint of a magazine from Two Worlds, which is talking about 12 notable apostles of spiritualism. Of course, those apostles are the Fox sisters, Emma Harditch Britton, and Cora Richmond. Cora Richmond also did the eulogy talk at Emma Harditch Britton's funeral, which was in England, because Emma died in England. But Cora spent about 2 years in England and demonstrating for the public. What she used to do, and she started this at the age of 15 years old, she would be able to go into a trance state. She would have the people in the audience, so she wouldn't know ahead of time, pick a topic. And of course, they would always try to pick topics that were very obscure. So she would have no way at 15 years old of knowing educationally what the information was about. So she would go into the trance state and she would give a brilliant talk on whatever the subject was that they gave her. And this happened time and time again. And all of the scientists and well-educated individuals would always say that her talks were outstanding, very good. And she did this all around the United States. Now I'm going to talk about J.V. Mansfield. Mansfield is called a writing medium. He was a prominent member of the spiritualist movement during the mid to late 19th century. All of these people that I'm talking about were very prominent people in the spiritualist movement. And when you read the histories of them, they all knew each other. And they all worked together and sat in each other's seances. And most of them knew Emma Harditch Britton. And Mansfield, though, was very, very well known for these letters that he wrote. He charged $5 for a 1 hour session and $3 for a half-hour session. And even the famous Mary Todd Lincoln went to him for a message. He was the one that encouraged Emma Harditch Britton to travel to San Francisco. These people went from one coast to the other, traveling all around, talking about spiritualism. He followed the spiritual instructions that he received in the beginning to sit, and on the 52nd day of his sitting, his hand mechanically moved to write. As a resident of Boston, his mediumship skills began to unfold, especially in the area of writing. And so what people would do is they would send a sealed letter with a question addressed to the spirits. He would put the envelope containing the questions on a desk before him. And those letters often came to him without addresses, so he had no idea who it was. And they were enclosed in another envelope addressed to the medium. He would place his left hand upon the letter and sit patiently waiting for the influence of the spirit world to move his right hand so that he could write a reply. So in his right hand, he would write a reply to the letter and send it back to the person. Because of this, he became known as the spiritual postmaster. The letters were dictated to him from a muscular movement of the index finger in his right hand while the left touched the letter. These were the same movements used by telegraph operators, except James was controlled by unseen powers. And we know that many times during the Victorian era, they compared the mediums to the telegraph operators who were sending messages across different distances. The mediums were just getting messages from the spirit world down here onto the earth plane. He also spent 4 years in San Francisco, and this is very interesting. He wrote a series of letters to his family back east, and these are available at the University of Michigan, and I'm going to love to go and try and look at them. And the Mansfield collection is valuable in American history, not just spiritualist history, because he chronicled the Civil War, and he also chronicled racism in America, not just with African Americans, but with Chinese, and the way women were not equally treated. So these letters have a wealth of information about American culture at that time. The Bang sisters. The Bang sisters were very much an important part of Lilydale. They had a house here and lived here in the summer. They also worked out of Chicago, but they came here and did their spirit art and even demonstrated their art at the Stump. And the Stump is a famous place in Lilydale. It's out in the middle of the beautiful Leolin Woods, and it is an old tree stump, and the mediums used to stand on top of the tree stump and give their messages to the audiences that were there, that were gathered. And the Bang sisters actually did drawings there, and they did have a house here, which is still, of course, standing. One was born in 1862 and the other in 1859. Ironically, May Fox and Lizzie Fox, May died on my birthday, I just found out, and Lizzie died March 29th in 1920. As I said, they lived in Chicago and they lived in Lilydale. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, and this is an etching of what the Bang sisters' work used to be like. They did sit, when they did portraits in their home, they did put the canvas in front of a window. But when they were working in the Lilydale Auditorium, what would happen is that the people would come to the auditorium. The Bang sisters would give out tickets. A ticket would be drawn, and that person would come up to the stage, and the Bang sisters would create a portrait for them. Now, the portraits were like a Polaroid picture. It would, like an ectoplasmic haze would go in front of the canvas, and then slowly the picture would emerge like a photograph, like a Polaroid picture comes out. And the pictures, the eyes were the last thing to open. So the eyes would be closed, and then all of a sudden the eyes would open and the picture would be finished. Now, the paintings could change. If somebody came and said, "Oh, you put a picture of a daisy in my daughter's hair, but she always liked lilies." Well, by the time the person got home, the flower would have changed from a daisy to a lily. And these paintings are amazing to look at. We have many of them here in Lilydale, in not only the museum, but also in the office of the National NSAC. There are no brush marks on any of these images. They look like they're airbrushed, and they've been described as if they were painted with butterfly wings. So they're absolutely phenomenal. They're just as fresh today as they were when they were done in their day. So the Bang sisters were very, very, very important in the history And fortunately, they're just starting to be recognized by the art world, too. I mean, they haven't. This work has been pretty much unrecognized up until recently. Along with the Bang sisters were the Campbell brothers. Now, the Campbell brothers also did precipitated paintings. And Alan Campbell was born in England in 1833, and he moved to the States where he met Charles Shrouds. The two became friends and business partners, and they had an importing and exporting business in the New England area. They also worked out of Atlantic City. Charles' birth date is unknown, and Alan, they started working as mediums together in the late 1890s. They are said to be the mediums responsible for introducing the idea of the use of a spirit cabinet, which is interesting because I always thought it was the Davenport brothers. But the Campbell's brothers did amazing work. Alan's forte seemed to be the manifestation of spirit art through precipitation, and Charles could materialize spirit. So they did most of these mediums did not just do one type of physical mediumship. They did many different types. And the Campbell's brothers were also known for their slate writing and their typewriter seances, where a typewriter was placed on a table in a cabinet and the sitters joined hands around the table and messages would be typed and later distributed. Similar things happen today with computers. One of their most well-known works was produced in June of 1887, and in a seance, it is a large portrait that was precipitated of Alan's spirit guide, and it is Azor. All of the people that were present when Azor precipitated and happened have signed the back of the painting to testify that they saw it happen. And those signatures are still there today. Azor was part of the Minnesota art show on spirit art that they did the past 2 years. Lily Dale did eventually loan it to them so the wider public could see it. But it sits in the hotel in Lily Dale and is available to see all summer long. It's amazing, and the eyes seem like they follow you as you walk around the room. The Campbell's brothers also did a lot of historical figures. They did a painting of Abraham Lincoln. This painting, they actually examined the eyes of Lincoln in the painting, and they used iridology, which tells you what kinds of illnesses people have. And when they examined the painting eyes, they found it had the same illnesses that Lincoln had in his real life. So it's been an amazing piece. Alan died in 1919, and Charles passed away in his home in Cottage Row in Lilydale in 1926. So they worked here very much. Unfortunately, the home that they had here in the Dale has burned down and is no longer here. Another medium that worked very much in Lilydale was W.A. Mansfield. Now, ironically, I have not been able to find his birth dates or his date death. I will have to get someone to help me find it. William Mansfield was an independent slate writer. We had a number of slate writers here in Lilydale. Although we did have the materialization mediums as well. We had trumpet mediums. We had a rapping medium. We had all kinds of different mediums that would do all forms of physical mediumship. We had a spirit photographer here as well. Mansfield was here as a young man. He left home. He was originally born on a farm, and he worked on another farm so that he could be educated. And he did get an education for himself. He lived in the Midwest, and he did encounter a well-known medium named Mrs. Maud Lord. When he went to one of her seances, after going to the seance, he found out that people could form circles and that they could do seances on their own. So he formed a circle, and it was discovered that William was the medium of the circle because things didn't happen unless he was there. So what happened was his mediumship became so successful that he had to leave his career working in a furniture company so that he could become a full-time medium. He spent 5 seasons that was a time when it was called Casadega Camp, which have been recorded in local newspapers, and you can find him mentioned in Ron Nagy's books as well. So he was here for quite a while doing slate writing for everyone. Now I'm taking a little bit of an aside. Maud Lord, because her name came up, was an American direct voice medium who worked under her name and her married name, which is Maud Lord Drake. She was born in West Virginia, and she also had a call over her face. So we see that 2 of these mediums that were incredibly successful had a call over their face when they were born. She was in the public ever since she was 7 years old, just like Cora Richmond was in the public since 15. As a speaker, inspirational speaker, she was skilled with all phases of mediumship. And like Cora Richmond, she could also diagnose diseases and help people who were sick. This is the description from one of her seances. And as I'm putting this work together for more of a printed version, I am trying to get firsthand accounts of the mediumship. So here's a firsthand account of Maud Lord. Independent spirit voices were audible all over the room, many of them addressing their personal friends at the same moment. So you could hear different voices at the same moment. Musical instruments were thumping and flying around pretty lively, among them a music box which was wound by some invisible force as it sped through the air. It stopped several times and rested on my head and on my lap, seeming much attached to my locality. After this was repeated several times, I felt what seemed like little fingers around my face and little arms around my neck, and I heard a whisper saying distinctly, "Mama, Mama, I'm here, your baby boy, Martin. Look while I try to show you myself." So we see here that she's doing, trying to do materialization along with the direct voice, and her direct voice was able to project a number of different voices simultaneously at the same time that would bring evidential information to the participants. Now, a medium that I became fascinated with was David Jimerson. And I found him because, and here's a picture of the Lilydale porch with the mediums on it, and it was from the sign in the back here that I found out he was a physical medium. This person right here in the center is Jimerson. Jimerson was a Native American, and that's what interested me about him. And fortunately, Elton Bloomfield was able to find this information about him. So this is coming from Elton. He was born David Benjamin Jimerson, not Jimerson, to the Seneca tribe in the Allegheny Indian Reservation of Cattaraugus County, New York. Now, Cattaraugus County is the county next to the county Lilydale is in. So we are next to and almost into the Seneca Nation here as well. So we have a lot of influence with the Seneca tribes. In fact, Lilydale itself used to be Native American ritual grounds. Lilydale is an island, literally an island, and the Native Americans used to be here before it was a spiritualist community. Now, Jimerson was a real character. He had two wives at the same time, Amanda and Nancy Halftown, and these two were sisters. Nancy was a medicine woman, and she and David were considered to be Indian mediums on the reservation, meaning that they were able to communicate with spirit. Eventually, they did try to get him on bigamy, and he ended up with Nancy rather than Amanda. But he didn't last too long with Nancy. That relationship fell apart, and he divorced her. He was married several times afterwards, and when he moved to Lilydale, he met his third wife, Maud Twillinger, who was a trumpet medium. And at the Dale, he developed materializations and spirit art skills. But of course, I haven't been able to find out anything about the type of spirit art he did. His popularity heightened during the time he was in Lilydale, and in the off-season, he started to travel out like all the other spiritualist mediums did around the country, giving lectures and demonstrations. He especially worked in Canada, and I have found documentation on this. He passed away on November 20th, 1918. Another little tidbit about Jimerson is that when he was a younger man, he was working near railroad tracks, and his foot got caught in between the trains and amputated. So he actually was disabled while he was doing all of this, but he seemed to manage to cope with it pretty well because he went on to do all of his mediumship and marry 4 times. Now, Keeler. Keeler is the one that is the most well-known, I think, or one of the well-known here from the Dale. And P-L-O-A, Keeler, is named after his mother's 4 sisters, husbands, Pierre, Louis, Armand, Augustus Keeler. He was a slate writing medium for over 60 years, and he performed materializations and billet readings. He traveled extensively, including to London, where he met with Queen Victoria, and he wrote a booklet called How to Obtain Independent Writing at Home. And I will be using this booklet to try to do an experiment in our conference on doing slate writing. In 1907, Herwood Carrington claimed that Keeler was a fraud. And this started the big fraudulent stuff, and that's why I have a picture of Houdini here with Keeler, because Houdini also came to Lilydale and tried to claim fraud. And the mediums here had what they called a telegraph system, that when Houdini was in town, they all told each other that he was here, so they knew to watch out for him. Because he was trying to find the fraud. But what happened with Keeler is that Carrington wrote a big article about fraud in Lilydale, and this article was published in the New York Times, and it had a very detrimental impact on the Dale. But the Lilydale board didn't accept Carrington's findings, and they did private testing of Keeler with, strict testing under their own conditions, and they found no fraud. So Keeler obviously was tainted by fraud, but the assembly claimed he didn't do it. Keeler was alleged to have channeled the spirit of Abraham Lincoln, and he produced a message plate signed with his name on it. That is here in the Lilydale Museum. And the way he does it, just to give you an idea, he takes an infinitesimal piece of slate pencil, and I'm thinking it's chalk, is what they mean, and it's placed between 2 carefully washed slates upon which there are no marks at the time it's done. The slates are then tied together and placed on a table, and this is done in broad daylight, and they're left there until the writing is produced on the slates. Again, you can usually hear that scratchy sound of the writing happening. Keeler died at the age of 93, and he was doing slate writing, I think, pretty much up until the end. Flo Cottrell. Now, this one is a very interesting medium, and she's kind of unique when we look at physical mediumship. She was called the rapping medium, and she went back to the beginnings of spiritualism and the fact that the Fox sisters could communicate with the spirit world. And she took this idea of the Fox sisters and the way they worked, and she did the same type of rapping messages here in Lilydale. Now, I believe she lived in the Fox Cottage, but this was all done in the Fox Cottage because the Fox Cottage was moved to Lilydale in 1916. And it's 100 miles from where it originally was. And Flo Cottrell was known as the rapping medium. And what she would do is she would have 2 times during the day, the spirit world told her what times she would work. And twice a day, she would do demonstrations for people out of the Fox Cottage of the rappings. And she created a rather complex system for the codes of raps. And for the spirit world, 3 raps meant yes, 2 raps meant no. And she holds a very unique place in Lilydale history and in mediumship history in general, because she is one of the few mediums, physical mediums, who carried on the tradition of the Fox sisters. Now, this one is a very interesting gentleman, Dr. Alexander J. McIver Tyndall. He was considered a psychologist, psychic, author, lecturer, pastor, and newspaperman. He was born in England, and his father was a surgeon, so he went to medical school as well. He was trained as a physician, so that's where the doctor comes from. And in 1889, he came to America from London, and he came across Canada, so he came all the way across Canada, and then he stopped in Seattle. He then stayed on the West Coast for a while. At that time, he became a newspaper man, and he was working with publications. He then moved east, and in the east, in Buffalo, New York, he became an ordained spiritualist minister in the Church of the Spirit Communication in Buffalo. His first pastorate was in Jamestown, and Buffalo is about 90 miles. No, it's an hour. It's 60 miles. It's an hour away from Lilydale. Jamestown is half an hour in the opposite direction away from Lilydale. So he started in Buffalo, then worked in Jamestown, and then came to Lilydale. He had a house on 9 Buffalo Street. By the way, these houses are still here. This is a national historical landmark site. And these houses, they don't look like they did back in the 1800s, but the houses are still here. So you can find the addresses. Now, Tyndall's mediumship was generally performed in full light. The Buffalo Times described his mediumship in the following way. What are the mechanics of his work? I will my mind free of thought when I am blindfolded. So he was blindfolded. And then he says, when I step into the room, and he was blindfolded, put into the room, he said, there are flashes before my eyes as a picture of the surroundings, and more clearly, the object which I am to find, whether it is in color or not. So they would put an object in the room, they would blindfold him, let him into the room and tell him to find the object, and he would. Now, sometimes he saw this clairvoyantly in color, sometimes he saw it in black and white. In addition to his mediumship, Tyndall also was a very, very prolific writer. He was editor of a publication called The Swastika, obviously done well before the Germans adopted that as a logo. and he wrote articles on telepathy and psychic research. So he was very much into telepathy. He wrote under a bunch of series of pseudonyms, Ollie Normand, John Lockwood, and in 1813, under the pseudonym of Ollie Normand, he co-authored the book Conscious Consciousness, The Man God Who We Await, and Telepathy, The Language of the Future. This is a picture of Tyndall with his wife. I believe it's here in Lilydale, although he did eventually move to the West Coast and he died in Santa Barbara, California. He never revealed his age. He never would give anybody his dates of birth or how old he was, but he was thought to be close to 100 years old when he passed. Now we come to Alexander Duchard. There are many other mediums that obviously I haven't been able to discuss, but I'm picking Alexander Duchard because Alexander Duchard was the last physical medium to work in Lilydale. He was born in 1879 and died in 1943. I'm interested in him also because I knew his son. His son was an acquaintance of mine who lived in the Dale. Many of these people had families that lived in the Dale for many, many years afterwards. And Duchard is well known for the fact that he predicted World War II. Apparently, most of the British mediums were saying the war wasn't going to happen, but Duchard, John Kelly, and Minnie O'Hara also predicted it. John Kelly and Minnie O'Hara were also mediums here in Lilydale. Minnie O'Hara was a physical medium as well. I do know her great-granddaughter, and there's not a lot of info. I have to get more information on her. But again, a lot of these people, the records have been lost, and we don't have a lot of information on them. We know that Duchard did work as a machinist, and he was married several times. His last wife, Gladys May, was also a medium here in Lilydale. His son, Ron, who was my friend, was from his first marriage. He was a slate writing and a direct voice medium. And there was an adverse discussion about his materializations. He went to New York City and started to produce this phenomena, but the Psychic Observer told Lilydale not to allow his materializations unless he was tested. So they wrote a very negative article about him. And as a result, he was not allowed to hold seances in Lilydale because of the Psychic Observer. The publication later stated that it should not have published the article. So this gets into, again, where the fraud comes in and the fraud builds and the fraud becomes publicized. He also was visited by members of the royal family, and he died in 1948. And just a side note, this idea of fraud has really escalated, and it's still escalating today. I go to England, and there are some people, and some of them are friends of mine, that are very, very vehemently arguing that a lot of what we see in physical mediumship is fraudulent. However, I have to say, some of the things they say to me seem a little bit improbable. That's the best word, improbable, because they're basically telling me that any face you see in ectoplasm is a photograph. So I'm wondering how the medium could project a photographic image into ectoplasm, or they probably say the ectoplasm is fake. I mean, so they have all kinds of reasons. Anybody produces an apport that you can buy on eBay, they say was bought on eBay. So they go way the other extreme to try to demonstrate fraud. And they're always saying that these mediums are always working with minions and these people that are doing stuff behind the scenes to make the seances possible. However, I witnessed things that you just can't believe that it's not real. So with the conference, we're trying to allow people to make their own minds up about it. So now, just to let you know, now we get here. Here is the beginning of a list of visiting mediums that came to work in Lilydale. And we see that they did psychometry. Psychometry and palmistry were two very big things in the Dale, along with the slate writing and the materializations. A lot of people were what we call test mediums, which are like evidential mediums. We have slate writers, as I said, trance mediums, and Ira Davenport, the famous one of the Davenport brothers, came to Lilydale in 1885. He didn't demonstrate, but he did come to the Dale to talk. So these are just a few of them that visited here. Now, this is the list of all of the resident physical mediums from Lilydale. So we can see again that there is a ton of them that were working here, again, on the trumpets, on the slates, with the paintings. And two of them, Keeler, P-O-L-A Keeler, had a brother, and his brother, William, was a spirit photographer here in Lilydale, and I believe those pictures are in the museum. So we have two blindfolded. Jack Kelly was also a blindfolded medium. Jimerson did the materializations. So we see just a large number, and there's just the information about all these people just was never recorded, which is a real shame. And we had direct voice mediums here as well as the trance mediums. So hopefully I'll be able to get some of the information about these mediums back into history so that they won't be forgotten. At least their names won't be forgotten, that's for sure. So it's very interesting that all of these people were here, and the Dale never mentions them. I mean, they are they are known because many pictures of them are in our building called the Assembly Hall, which is filled with portraits of the different mediums. And so that's one place where it's kept, but I'm hoping to bring it all back. So that's just an overview of some of them, and hopefully in the future I'll be able to get more information about the other ones.